Hey everyone, Miss Kellett here, and I'm going to talk to you about character analysis paragraphs. So first, I just want to kind of tell you why we analyze characters. So when we read a book or any text, we usually have characters if it is a fictional text. And in the big picture, connecting with characters is how we understand stories, and it's how we understand how to put ourselves in other people's shoes and how to empathize with others, right? It's how we learn to care about other people and to see other people's point of view. Understanding characters also helps us to see why they make certain choices in certain situations. So, in different books and different texts, we're going to see characters in totally different situations, and we're going to be seeing how they respond in those situations. And we start to understand why they respond when we look at, what motivates them and how they act, how they speak. And then finally, understanding characters helps us to see patterns in the way that humans behave, right? So we're looking for a greater meaning in every text. A greater meaning is kind of the reason that we read a text, right? We come to understand humans and how they act, what it means to be human, what it means to feel human emotions when we read about other characters' experiences. So understanding characters helps us to understand greater meaning. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about character analysis paragraphs. So, first of all, analysis is breaking down a text into its parts and then explaining each part. So, we're going to kind of like find a part of a text, break it open, and talk about the different parts and what we understand based on each part. And usually, we take what we understand about each part and we put it together to come up with a greater meaning or a statement about a character or some bigger picture. Okay, so taking all those small details and making a bigger picture out of it. So you will write a paragraph about a character's traits based on STEEL. Remember, STEEL stands for speech, thoughts, effect on others, actions, and looks. So we want to take details about what a character says or does or thinks or how they affect other people. And we're going to analyze those choices that the character is making. So some tools that we have for you to use that are available on Google Classroom are the rubric, which is how your paragraph will be graded, a drafting template, and then a sample paragraph. So I'm actually going to take this example from chapter 1 of Mice and Men and show you how to use the drafting template. Okay, so it says George knelt beside the pool and drank from his hand with quick scoops. Tastes all right, he admitted. Don't really seem to be running though. You never ought to drink water when it ain't running, Lenny, he said hopelessly. You drink out of a gutter if he was thirsty. So we have this example of George. Um, the action he's taking is kneeling by the pool and drinking with his hand. And then he's also talking to Lenny and saying, hey, you shouldn't drink water if it's not running. Um, and he kind of lectures Lenny and says, you shouldn't do that. And, if you were thirsty, you drink out of any dirty place that you could find water. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this quote because I think it tells us something about George. So this is the drafting template. You're going to see that there are several parts of the paragraph that we want you to include. Okay, and then so each section is kind of explained. And then in the middle, we have some words that you can use for your paragraph. You're not restricted to these words. If you want to write something different, you can, but you are welcome to use these words. And again, each part of the paragraph we want you to include is kind of explained over here. So I'm going to go ahead. This is where it says evidence, which is where I'm going to use my quotes. I'm just going to like put my quote here for now, and I'm going to come back to it later. Okay. So the first thing I need is a topic sentence. In one sentence, introduce the idea you will focus on throughout your paragraph. So I'm going to be talking about George as a character. And I think that the fact that he's thinking carefully about the water and where it comes from, and he's also looking out for Lenny, I'm going to say that he's a responsible person, and that's a character trait I'm going to use. So what I can do is I can choose any of these sentences to go ahead and write about George and how he is responsible. Um, I think I'm gonna pick this one in chapter, and then I need to fill in the blanks here. So in chapter 1, George can be seen as responsible through his blank. I think I'm gonna use um, speech because he talks a lot in this section, and I think his words help us to really understand how he's responsible. So I'm gonna say in chapter 1, George can be seen as responsible through his speech. Okay, I think I'm going to also add in chapter 1 of Mice and Men. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next section. In the beginning, middle, end of the text, the character is blank. Oh, the character blank, so it's George, is something. Or when blank, the character begins to blank. I think I'm going to use this one sentence because George is responding to Lenny. So I'm going to say like, sorry, when we do context, we're going to explain what happens in the text right before my quote appears. So I need to say kind of like what's going on in the story so that my reader understands the quote. So I'm going to talk about Lenny. So I'm going to say when Lenny is drinking from the pool of green water. And then instead of the character, oh, actually, I think this should be underlined. So you put the character's name here. So I'm going to say George begins to. And then I think I'm going to say, maybe like warn Lenny about the dangers of drinking from the pool. Okay, so you can kind of see how I'm taking some of these and I'm kind of changing them to fit what I want to say. But I'm definitely like writing sentences kind of based on this, based on the description over here, and based on where I want to go. So next, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write a sentence that includes some of this. So I might say character name explains. So I'm going to say character name, George. And then I'm going to say like maybe explains to Lenny because he's talking to Lenny. And then I'm going to put my quote. So I'm going to say, don't really seem to be running though. I think he's talking about the water. So I'm going to say explains to Lenny that the water. Okay, and then I'm going to put an extra quotation mark there to show that George is talking. Don't really seem to be running though. Never oughta drink water when it ain't running. Lenny. And then I'm going to put the author's last name and the page number. And then I might also include this part here. So I might say, George says this hopelessly, also adding, also commenting that Lenny would drink out of a gutter if he was thirsty. Yikes. Okay. So now I can delete this because I added my own version. Okay, so I have put a quotation in here as my evidence, and the next thing I'm going to do is my analysis. Okay, so you can kind of take a look at some of these options. It's going to take probably 3 or 4 sentences to analyze this because we need to talk about all the different ways that George is being responsible. So he's told Lenny that he shouldn't drink running water. He says this hopelessly, which shows that like he's feeling that maybe Lenny would never listen, right? And that Lenny may never understand, or that he's told Lenny about the dangers of different things multiple times, right? And so it's clear that he's responsible because he keeps telling Lenny, even though it seems like maybe Lenny will never listen. Especially because he says you drink out of a gutter if he was thirsty. That kind of shows that like George thinks that like Lenny needs that support and that he may never listen, but George is going to keep trying anyway. So those are all things that we can talk about when we talk about how George is responsible in this section. Okay, so your paragraph is going to have a topic sentence, context, evidence analysis, where you're looking at the quotation that you picked and you are explaining how the quote reveals a specific character trait. So I would be talking about how this evidence helps us to understand that George is responsible. And then finally, you're going to have your concluding sentence where you're summarizing the points that you made. So what I want to show you now is a completed characterization response. Okay, in chapter one of Mice and Men, George is characterized as someone who's responsible. Okay, so now we've got our context here, our evidence, and then our analysis. Our analysis is going to include both general connection between the evidence and the character trait, but it's also going to refer back to specific words from the quote. So you'll notice that we quote again this part where it says, "You never ought to drink from the water when it ain't running," right? So we've re-quoted it down here to specifically refer to it in my analysis. And then again, we've quoted the word hopelessly again in order to specifically explain how that helps us to understand George. Okay, and then also, this is our conclusion sentence. So I'm gonna go ahead and highlight it in purple. Okay, so you can look at this example. A couple things you might wanna notice is that the highlighting here matches the highlighting. So like in the template, so this purple section right here is the concluding sentence, which is also purple. Okay, another thing is that in this paragraph, the underlined words are words that you should try to use in your own writing. Okay, because they can be used in most analysis paragraphs or essays. So we want you to try to use those words in your own writing. Okay, I hope this helps and good luck writing your own character analysis paragraph.